Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a couple of my red wiggler worm bins. And as I do sometimes, I've taken some notes prior to coming down here pertaining to these systems to share with you. I guess the one thing that makes these two systems kind of interesting is that there's quite a difference in their ages. Normally I buddy up systems that are not too different in their ages, or might even be two systems that were launched on the same day. In those cases, though, I usually refer to those as brother bins or sister bins or twin bins. But when the systems that I buddy up are different in ages, they just get called buddy bins. And there is a pretty significant difference in the age of these two systems. The older system over here is actually 60 days older than the younger bin, and that 60 days difference is quite visible once you get down into the systems to check them out. But it did seem to me like, not very novel of a bit of information. Whatever, okay, they're 60 days apart in age, no big deal. So just out of curiosity, I went poking through their history, and it was completely unknown to me until I looked that these both actually track back to a fairly common ancestry. Both of these systems can be both traced back to my previous versions of my outdoor worm bag, peculiarly enough, and I did that completely unplanned. But basically, just to walk you through this, the older bin over here is 185 days old, and the younger system here 125 days old. I just made reference to their system numbers in my tracking spreadsheet, so don't get confused. The older system is the one that's known as system number 125, and system number 125, the older one, can actually be tracked to my previous version of my outdoor worm bag, version 4.0. What's running outside right now this year is version 5.0. So what's running in my system right here was actually my previous rendition of my outdoor worm system, and then what's running over here after having first been in another bin after it was bought indoors, I guess then it actually lived in the Vermibag tote for a little while, was actually the worms that were recruited out of outdoor worm bag version 3.0. So I don't know, I just thought that was kind of interesting because I had no idea that that was the case, and it just, for whatever reason, I guess it sort of brings an interesting additional angle to these two systems now that I know that they can both actually be tracked back to previous versions of my outdoor worm system. So when I noticed that, I thought that I would, take note of it and share that information with you guys. And they're due for a feeding because it's been 13 days now since we last fed them. I can't remember if that was some of the information over on the information board, but the feedings, I guess there was also information over there showing that the older system was fed 16 times so far, the younger system fed 10 times so far, so they're getting feedings number 17 and 11 today. These top covering pieces of bag, so you can see brown bag on one side and white bag on the other. It's sort of a double layer bag of what had been a bag of sugar, and I had a feeling that these bags were a little bit tougher than the typical top covering material that we lay out here. Normally we just lay out some newspaper, but this time we opted to go for this sort of double bag material to be our top covering, and it is pretty tough and it's holding up very, very, very well. So now we did have what had been, I guess, a fairly intact coffee filter over here serving as our feeding zone indicator. There was another one over here which was actually kind of beaten up already. It was really tattered. There was just a little chunk of it remaining, so we figured, let's let it continue in that role one more time. But I've got replacements, which is good. So I got a couple days worth of coffee as well as replacement coffee filters to become our replacement feeding zone indicators. And I got my knife because I didn't realize that one of the food items in my collection of stuff over here is actually a fairly large object. And unless there's two large objects in this pile where one system can get one and the other system can get another, I'm going to have to split that one in half. So I've got my handy dandy knife over here. And I got some other stuff on the side too that we're going to use, some of the typical things that we use when we're feeding my worm bins, such as my worm chow, and I've got this interesting material where I've taken a whole bunch of corn cobs That includes corn cobs that still had the corn kernels on them all. Was all dried out and shredded into this interesting little flaky material, so this will be part of their feeding as well today. And I just replenished my supply of leaves from outside too, so I've got leaves that we can include with their feeding as the bedding. And that doesn't have to be the only bedding, because I've also got a number of soiled napkins and paper towels and stuff like that. I think it's mainly napkins though, that I was going to include as bedding with today's feeding too. So I guess we'll see how far the napkins go, and then if we need to, we can supplement it with some leaves. But if nothing else, I thought that the leaves would be kind of a nice thing to sprinkle out over the top surface of these systems. You know, even though this older system is 185 days old, I do anticipate that it's going to continue going for a little while longer. So I feel like I've been a little bit stingy with the bedding over here in the older system, just because it was all starting to become so nice and aged. And you know, as you start looking through this material, you could see that it's really quite mature, especially away from the feeding zone. If you dig down outboard of the feeding zones, it's like almost pure castings anymore. But it does seem like if we're going to continue with these bins for a little while longer, and I believe we will continue for a little while longer, it would be fair to get some bedding mixed in to this material for these little wormies, because they need it, you know, they need bedding for sure. Although, you know, maybe I will just sort of stick to my typical rule of thumb, which is to yeah, I mean, I'll be generous with the bedding, but I think I will, you know, keep it in the feeding area, at least in the beginning. If it gets blended in later, that's fine, but I think it is good to put the fresh bedding right where the food's going to be, so that it gets a good amount of worm traffic, and then it gets infiltrated with all the bacteria and microbes and everything that live in the worm bin. So I've just been pulling out little sticks and stems, you know. Those are the sort of things that seem like they're just not going to go anywhere, so I like to extract them when I bump into them. This might be little chunks of additional bedding that was part of the last feeding, like napkin bits or whatever, and I think I smell citrus, and I think that that's what we're seeing here, is little bits of leftover citrus peel. It smells like orange. Sometimes I bump into a little bit of citrus peel and I could smell it. It's either lime or lemon or orange or something like that. And it is interesting how it hangs on to its scent, unlike most of the stuff that you go into your worm bins. Normally you can't smell anything, but for whatever reason the citrus definitely hangs on to its scent in the worm bins, while everything else just seems to lose its scent completely. And I don't know if that's due to the bacteria in the systems. So here too, I've got this really tough object. You know, if I'm unable to bust it, then I get suspicious. Perhaps it's a rock or something snuck in here somehow. I don't know how that could happen, but whatever. It just seems like a material that's not some sort of an organic material that's in the process of breaking down. I mean, maybe that's not true. Maybe rock is something that you would have to consider as organic, but definitely not a compostable material. All right, we've opened up the feeding zone partially in the younger system, but then we went full bore and opened up the entire feeding system in the older system. So let's do the same feeding system in the older system. Sometimes it feels like I'm just blabbering so quick that I'm not even paying attention to what I'm saying, and then a lot of times when I'm playing the video back, I hear myself make these verbal errors, completely, you know, unknown to me. I just sort of blurt it out, don't even realize I made the mistake, and then I only notice it while I'm editing the video. But it did sound to me like I might have said something that didn't make any sense there, so I kind of caught myself. Gotta tell you, these worms all look very happy and healthy. Good thing that the moisture is ample in these systems. The plastic coverings that we've been using are keeping the moisture down within the systems, not letting it evaporate away, and you know, it also kind of allows the very top surface of the material in the bins to stay nice and damp too. A lot of times if you're using some sort of a porous paper or a type of material to top cover with that doesn't hold in moisture, then the top surface of the bin can dry out a little bit. Sometimes I do that and it's fine, but then the top surface, as it dries, becomes less and less hospitable to worm traffic. So I think one of the big advantages to keeping plastic covers on is that it really does allow all the material in the systems to stay nice and damp and hospitable to worm traffic. So this is actually paper towel. I thought it was mainly napkin, but this is paper towel. This is napkin. This is also paper towel, so we'll throw that in the other system because I think this is napkin. Just trying to be fair, you know, give each system a fair shake at what I'm dishing out here. These are obviously napkins, really nice, fancy, ornate ones. The napkins that you find around my house are kind of boring, usually from the dollar store. Low quality napkins. When you go to my mom's house, though, on the other hand, she likes somewhat more luxurious, large, fancy napkins. I believe these really large ones are from IKEA. That's kind of like her favorite go-to place for napkins nowadays. She's always got an assortment of different colors. She can always sort of match the occasion to an appropriately colored napkin. Or whatever just happens to be on hand. So now you can see kind of why I was questioning whether or not it would be necessary to use leaves down in the feeding area, because we are being pretty generous with the paper products down here in the feeding zone as far as bedding, supplementary bedding goes. But I think we could still probably add leaves, because I thought that the leaves could go in at the very end as sort of a top covering. So as far as foundational bedding to go beneath the feeding zone, I think the napkins are going to work really nicely down there. And then just as a top coating across the entire system, we'll sprinkle in a whole bunch of fresh leaves that I just bought in from outside. So the old foods just went in, and now we can start coming in with the fresh foods. So I'm definitely curious to see what the deal is with this big... Is it the only big thing we've got in here? I think it is. So let's see if we can bust it up into somewhat smaller chunks. I think this is what they refer to as a parsnip. And before we accidentally divvy up all these shavings, carrot and parsnip shavings, and what I think is some parsley in here too, let's make sure we bring over a good bunch of it to the other system as well. Obviously there's been some soup prepared recently, as you can probably tell based on the ingredients. And I'm not sure, perhaps by being frozen, even though these chunks are fairly large, hopefully they'll be stuff that the worms are able to burn through pretty easily, despite the fact that I was unable to chunk it up into somewhat smaller pieces for them. I'm just thinking that we've probably divvied this stuff out pretty fairly. Alrighty. I'm just wondering if maybe just one of these smaller pieces can come back over to this one, and then we can consider that as a fair split of the veggies, or at least that particular huge veggie that needed to go. So there's just a few more little smaller things in here that need to go, and then we can move on to giving them their portion of coffee. So the coffee will go in, and we'll supplement the coffee with what we usually use to supplement the coffee, which is my worm chow sprinkled over the top of it. And let's not forget, we've also got that shredded corn that we can include down here as well. And you know, as far as the corn goes, I even thought that we might make the top coating of leaves interesting by perhaps blending the corn in with the leaves, so that the corn would be sort of a food object mixed in with the bedding material across the entire top surface. So even though we've got sort of a formal feeding zone right down the middle that we're going to mark with our feeding zone indicators, we'll also have sort of just, you know, food material commingled in with the top covering bedding material that we plop in here at the end, all those leaves that I've got for them at the end. So this looks pretty nice. I just like to go out to the outer edges of the systems during my check-ins to see how things look. If nothing else, to aerate them, but mainly just to inspect them to see how things are coming along. Here in the younger system, you can clearly see evidence of leaf stems and stuff like that. I think we'll see less of that sort of stuff when we excavate the outer edges of the older bin. There, I think we're going to see mainly a whole lot of finished castings and a lot less of that sort of lingering leftover material. So, yeah, some of you might be questioning, hey, how come you didn't crush those old corn cobs? You know why? Because I forgot. Usually at least nowadays, not usually, but nowadays I've been attempting to take the corn cobs that I encounter along the way, the old corn cobs, and crush them. In the past, I had always wanted to just leave them to break down slowly on their own, with only the worm traffic contributing to its breakdown. But more recently, I've been kind of on a new kick to not worry about how long it takes for a corn cob to break down on its own. I know how long it takes. It takes a very long time. Since I'm already well aware of what to expect if we don't do anything, I think the more interesting thing to do nowadays is to simply help it along and crush it. Break it up as I can, you know, crack the corn cobs in half once they allow for it, and later on, once they become brittle enough, just crush them. And just like everything else, when you increase the surface area of stuff that you put into your worm bins, it simply, you know, increases the amount of surface that worms can approach it from all different sides, and hopefully do away with it a little bit more quickly than if you had not. So the feeding zone indicators, I thought we would sprinkle the leaves down first and then put the feeding zone indicators on top of the leaves. So why don't we do that? And I don't know, should we put the corn sprinkles out here all over the top surface, and then maybe even a little bit of it onto the leaves that we sprinkle in here? This way the worms will kind of bump into that stuff and definitely spend a little bit more time there, because they'll not only have nice fresh bedding to roam around in, but they'll also encounter little bits of yummy foods to have along the way too. So here in the older bin, I somehow felt like we've got a little bit more material, like we're getting closer to the capacity of the system. Maybe I'm just imagining, but it does seem like it's a little bit closer to reaching the top. So here I didn't put in quite as much leafy material, I don't think, as I did into the younger bin. We fed down the middle, so that's where the feeding zone indicator is going. Over here it somehow feels like we added a little bit more leafy matter, just because this system does feel like it has a little bit of catching up to do as far as, you know, the amount of material that it's received over its lifetime. More feedings, each feeding coming in with extra bedding. So they don't need to be equal. There is, after all, 60 days difference in their ages. So it makes complete sense for the older system to be a little bit closer to being full. And the only thing remaining, as you might recall, are these top covering pieces of paper, which I don't know why, but I like to place in top covering pieces of paper right beneath the plastic covers, because I know that there's going to be water collecting on the plastic as it attempts to evaporate out of the bin, but is unable to due to the plastic covers. And as that stuff eventually gathers and condenses and drops back down, those top covering papers just gives that moisture someplace to land, someplace for the worms to hang out and enjoy that moisture. So that's it. That's it for our check-in with our buddied up systems of red wigglers with 60 days difference in their ages, and a newly discovered novelty bit of information that tells us that these two systems can actually be traced back to outdoor worm bag version 4.0 and outdoor worm bag version 3.0. And, you know, I think outdoor worm bag version 5.0 that's outside right now might be coming in one of these days pretty soon too. But we'll have to decide on what to do with that one in the near future. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.